Good morning, everyone, and I'd like to welcome you to the Public Works Garage here in Bristol, Connecticut. It has been a hub of activity here for almost the last week. We have been operating 24/7 in order to open up all of our streets, restore power in conjunction with our friends at Eversource, and we've been very fortunate to have a dozen or so crews in and out of Bristol over the last 6 days. At this point today, we have gone from a high of Wednesday morning with 55% of Eversource customers without power down to 0.87, and we are working diligently in order to surgically attack that 0.87, some of whom have transformer issues, some of whom have underground issues, or some of which are just in very complicated spots that are still dealing with lines down. We have had significant damage both in our parks, on our streets, and also private property destruction as well. So it was key that we as a community were poised once we realized on Tuesday just how difficult it was in order to mobilize all of our available resources, which we did on Tuesday afternoon by mobilizing here with our public works crews who did not go home that day, and we also pulled in our parks maintenance and water and sewer crews as well in order to ensure that all the streets could be opened up immediately for emergency access. The fire department responded to over 125 calls just in that 8-hour period. We had wires on fire, we had wires hanging, we had live wires entangled in trees, we had trees down, and we had poles down. And I'm sure that I speak for most of the mayors and first selectmen when I say that we really didn't expect such widespread destruction. So we were luckily prepared and able to handle that. Our focus has been on now communicating out with all of our residents about what's the next steps. Those who don't have power, we're liaisoning with our friends at Eversource in order to do that. And I can't say enough about the fact that we were lucky to have assigned to us 3 supervisors who are actually Bristol residents. Bob Passamano, Steve Butler, and John Zelansky were with us almost every minute of the last 6 days. They know their communities, they know what to troubleshoot, and they know that one small dot on their truck screen doesn't just represent a house. It might be a house with a medically fragile child, it might be a group home, it might be someone who's on oxygen, and we were able to quickly work with them in order to dispatch and solve as many of those problems as we could. I'd also like to recognize our municipal liaison, Laura Purbeck, who has been superb. From Eversource's headquarters, she is in touch with us every day, morning and night, in order to really triage some of those issues. So we don't have any real concerns right now, except that 0.87%. We're resting half of our crews. We're ready to go back out. And I just really think it's important for when the governor and the lieutenant governor come to town and our legislators that are here to understand that some of these issues, and some of them may be FEMA related, but some of them are so difficult that it takes all of these groups coming together in order to untangle. And the place that we're going to go on a tour after this is the one neighborhood that on a Sunday, yesterday, when we finally got to Harper Court, which is a very small street off of Route 6, it took us over 9 hours to deal with one street that had 8 houses on it and 1 telephone pole. 8 hours of Eversource, Asplund, a crane company, Public Works, Frontier, and Comcast all together. 8.5 hours for one small street. When you multiply that across the needs and the assessments that have to be done in a state such as ours, it's critically important that Eversource and their linemen have the resources that they need to get out into the streets and start solving these problems immediately. When you add the layer of COVID over this and understand that people are working at home, and not only do they need power, but they need internet, cable, and phones, it even just made it even more important. 10% of our city is not on water and sewer. They have septic and wells, and they did not have access to running water as well. So our water department provided free water throughout the week and the weekend. Our cooling centers were particularly challenging because we had homeless working through and trying to deal with a storm where they did not have adequate shelter. Again, a lot because of COVID restrictions in the shelters. So a multi-pronged approach worked here in Bristol. I'm happy to showcase it and all the people standing behind me that were a part of it. And I'd like to now introduce Lieutenant Governor Susan Bysowitz to talk about the state and introduce our governor. Thank you.
Mayor, thank you so much for your leadership the governor and I want to say thank you to all of our first responders, the linemen from Eversource, the fire department, the police department, all these great city workers who worked so hard to get Bristol back up and running. And Mayor, thank you so much for your leadership. You're a model, and we wanted to come here because Bristol is a place where there was collaboration and people working together, and we really appreciated that, and we wanted to see that because we've heard a lot about Eversource's failures, but this is a place where city officials worked hand in glove with Eversource and were able to overcome some huge challenges. Having said that, it is disturbing for the governor and I to go around the state and to know that more than 100,000 people still are without power. It's warm out, we have seniors, we have people with medical issues, we have people literally in the dark with rotting food, and this is a big problem. We want to thank, again, all the people in Bristol who worked so hard to get almost everyone back up and running with their power. The other thing I wanted to say is that we're so glad that PURA has opened an investigation. We think this is really critical, given that Eversource clearly wasn't prepared for the magnitude of the storm, and it's important for PURA to review the rate increase that was granted in light of all of the poor preparations across the state. The governor and I have been to every corner of the state, from Danbury to Tolland to Fairfield to Westport, where there are still almost 7,000 people without power. So we're going to get through this, but what we want to know is how we can prevent this. In 2011, we saw what happens when you have a disastrous climate change weather event. And following 2011, Eversource and the other companies were prepared for a couple of years. But then we saw statewide a lack of that preparation, and we need to get back on track because this is unacceptable. We know what we have to prepare for, and the governor and I are going to make sure that the municipalities, our utility companies, and our first responders are prepared for that. So with that, it's my great honor to introduce our governor, Ned Lamont.
All right, thanks, Susan. And Ellen, I'll just pick up where Susan left off. Yes, PURA, the regulatory body, is going to be opening up an investigation to see what we can learn from this and make sure it never happens again. But that's not why I'm here today. We've got plenty of time to figure out what went wrong. I'd like to talk about what went right. And I think that's what you heard Ellen saying. We had really close collaboration, with the Eversource liaison. Took a couple of days for everybody to get going. Once they got going, we now have 99% of the people have their power back. That's not good news for the 1% still without here in Bristol, but that's a start. And it wouldn't have been possible without each and every one of you. I was just talking to some of the firefighters, You had a couple of blazes here. And it was dark, the lights were out. They left their family at home in darkness and came to put out the blaze. And that's the people that I'm here to thank in a real way. I just want to say I heard a couple other stories that really touched me. One was a guy named Jamie Sewell. Did you hear that story? He's got a sports system here, and he had extra generators. And your water system here was on a generator. We had more critical facilities on a generator. If those generators ran out of fuel, if those generators malfunctioned before we got power back, we would have really had some critical issues. That didn't happen. In part, that didn't happen because people like Jamie stepped up and lent out 17 generators right when we needed it. Another story I was amused by more is Tina Biello. I think she used to be a cop. Is that what you told me? And, the winds were howling, and all of a sudden she could hear noise outside, but her dog had a sixth sense. And her dog started nuzzling her into the kitchen or into a bath facility, and all of a sudden the tree came crashing down. So there were a lot of unsung heroes in terms of what took place. But more importantly, what you got to know is give a shout out to the folks who are doing the work. Give a shout out to that guy who's climbing the pole out there. No need to turn up the heat right now. It's already 95 degrees. This person probably drove in 5 hours, 10 hours away. They're probably on 6 hours sleep. They're climbing that pole, doing everything they can to get the final, 87,000 people back up and operating in good stead. From there, we're going to learn from this and make sure we do better and better and better when it comes to our faster response, because timing is key. This is not a utility. This is not just electricity. This is life-giving for people. And that's what each and every one of you do every day during this last 6 days of hell. Thank you, everybody.
Governor, can we ask you some questions?
Sure.
So you were talking about how PURA is going to investigate about rate increases, and we were talking about how we're going to look into how Eversource did not properly estimate the extensiveness of the damage. But yet and still, while that's going on, we are amidst hurricane season. There will surely be others, and while we're trying to deal with learning from what was, what specifically can we do proactively to prevent further problems in the meanwhile?
Yeah, so Susan and I were on the unified command call, and all of a sudden I'm paying a lot more attention to weather reports. Another tropical storm slowly making its way up, 10 days away. This could be a very, very windy late summer, fall. The most important thing I think we can do right now, and we're going to be talking about this with PURA, is make sure in terms of how we regulate people, their rate of return is not tied to just how much money they spent, but their performance. And their performance is measured in terms of how fast you respond, how quickly you get the lights back on, how prepared you were, how much you pre-position people in place in anticipation of what's going on. So we reward you when you get that right, but we don't reward you when you get it wrong.
Massachusetts has a way better system to incentivize utility companies to be prepared, to have crews at the ready from out of state if they're needed, and we didn't have that as we should have with this storm.
Monetarily incentivized, is that what you're saying?
Yes, that if that's taken into consideration when they're up for a rate increase.
But in the meanwhile, there could be a storm in a week or 2 or days, like now.
And we should remember the lessons of 2011. That was 9 years ago. For a couple of years after 2011, the utilities companies got it right. We need to get back to that level of preparedness.
Governor, on Wednesday on this field, I asked you if you felt like Eversource was prepared for the storm. You seemed to defend them at the time, saying, how could anyone be fully prepared for a storm of this enormity? But then later that day, you called for a pure investigation into what they did leading up to the storm. So what changed your mind in those few hours?
I don't know about change of mind. Look, depending on the scale of the storm, you can't always have everybody there from day one, but they should have anticipated this. They should have seen what was going on. UI had a better catch on what was going on in terms of the nature of the weather. We should have been pre-positioning people a lot earlier. We should have made sure we had the inventory of everything we needed in place, ready to go. And that's why we're going to take a look at the incentives and disincentives so people are rewarded when they get it right, but not rewarded when they get it wrong.
Did you meet with the company in the days leading up to the storm? Did you have conversations with them about their preparedness?
I certainly met with the company the day after the storm. I was right there in Wethersfield.
And I would say our emergency management department was, and our director
Right.
of emergency management was in contact with
Constant
every
contact.
utility.
Yeah.
Ahead of time.
Yes, absolutely.
You didn't have any formal conversation. That's not protocol.
No, I didn't. I personally did not. But it's something Ellen said, which is really interesting. What gets so complicated are these telephone poles. They come crashing down. You need Eversource to come in there in terms of safety first to make sure you get that wire done. But then you have Frontier. Then you have the power company. Then you have a cable company. Then you have the telephone company. You've got a spaghetti of wires, and that's what we're working through right now to get all those other services up and operating. I'm a little worried about, cell service, because right now, you probably saw yesterday, cell was a little bit degraded, not working as well as it could have. There are a couple of reasons for that. One, the cell towers, most of them are on battery backup, so that could drain a little bit. And two, everybody is on their cell phone right now, so there's a lot of demand. I think you're going to see a big improvement on that today as well.
Governor Gov Lamont from the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities told us that it doesn't seem that municipal leaders are confident that PURA is going to get it right, because PURA has been around for the rate increase and other things that have happened recently with Eversource. So what can you tell us to make us think that PURA is going to get this right with the investigation?
Well, it's a new governor, and I know something about, how you manage this. But look, right now everybody's saying, off with their heads and let's sue them. And you did that last time. And you've had 3 different CEOs, so that's not the issue. Right now, the incentives are poorly aligned. And this is what I'm going to talk about at the briefing this afternoon, to make sure the incentives are aligned so that places like Eversource don't want to err on the side of caution, not taking an extra risk. So we suffered when that risk went bad.
And then on the other side, if we see that Eversource maybe knocks this thing out by tomorrow night or the next couple of days, should there be anything in their response if they're able to, say, get power back online faster than they did in 2011?
Well, getting it back faster than 2011 is not my metric for success. But we are going to define clearly what are the metrics for success, the level of the storm, how fast you get, how many people back up and operating. Maybe there'll be some other components as well in terms of customer service, customer satisfaction, environmental, and those will all be part of your rate of return. Thanks, everybody.
So we're going to head to Harper Court for a tour, and I think that will highlight some of the issues that the governor and lieutenant governor hit on. One thing that I would say from a municipal standpoint is what we're going to be looking for from PURA is the fact that we need the utilities and the communications companies to communicate better. So I can't be running from truck to truck to find out who has which order. Right now they are capable of replacing each other's poles, which is an efficiency that is great. However, I'm concerned that when we have something like Frontier, which is in a judgment situation right now, that they are not appropriately staffed, and that judge that's involved with that case needs to know that if you have 7 people out on disability and you're running a regional headquarters and you're supposed to have 12 linemen, then you should have 12 linemen and not 5. We ran into that a lot this weekend as well, and I think that the linemen for Eversource need to know that if they're on Harper Court and they need a transformer, they should be able to go back and pull one off the shelf. That also was not the case, whether it was a fuse box or some other things. The troubleshooters that are on the ground, they are doing their job, and they did it in Bristol. They did it brilliantly. We backed them up to the best of our ability from our public works with our 3 division heads, parks, water and sewer, and their critical functions, and then police and fire as well. Our emergency management director was the same as what the governor described. They're on the front lines. So I know that I'm held to a standard that when we have a storm coming, every department standing behind me runs through their checklist. It was my expectation that Eversource had done the same. Luckily, here in Bristol, we were able to make it work, but I think that checklist is one that needs to be refreshed and one that we need to have some municipal input as well as departmental emergency management input to make sure that the next storm, those boxes are checked a lot easier. For anybody who's wishing to go with us, the best route to go is going to be 229 to Route 6, and then head east, and you can pick up Stafford Avenue. Harper Court is off of Stafford and Lancaster, and it's a small street right there, and you'll be able to see one of the biggest challenges that we had yesterday.
Mayor, are all your election locations ready to go?
Yes, they are.
Are you highlighting a problem between the conversation between Eversource and the mutual aid crews? We've heard a lot of complaints from local municipalities about that kind of communication. Is there an issue between the mutual aid crews and Eversource there?
I personally would characterize it more as a fact that everybody was trying to get in and get things done, and there were same situations with event numbers being assigned to multiple crews. So I assumed on Sunday morning that a Frontier crew was going to be replacing pole 635 on Hart Street. I had the call before you dig with our water and sewer department. They went up on Saturday just to make sure we had done everything we were supposed to. I went to make sure that the call before you dig was done, and as I was there, a crew from Missouri pulled up to replace the pole 12 hours ahead of what I had been told by Frontier. Now we're happy, but some of that communication lag, I think, could be refocused into a more efficient manner, so that Missouri crew could have been somewhere else in another critical area. The Hart Street neighborhood was prepared to wait until Sunday morning. We got it done on Saturday night, and that's a great thing, but I think it illustrates the fact that I'm not sure where that central dispatch is with all of these event IDs, and I think that's something that could be strengthened.
Can I just add to what the mayor is saying? What the governor and I heard from mayors and first selectmen across the state was that they had liaisons and that didn't know anything about how many crews were coming and when, and there were literally first selectmen and mayors out in the northwest corner or the northeast corner that had liaisons that had no information. That's unacceptable. Here there was a different story with communication, but that's something that we need to fix for the future.
Well, we also had to be creative in that we had an AT&T tower go on Tuesday, which took down our police and 911 services. So we actually were creative, and we were in the trucks out there, and a police dispatcher was texting my phone with the outages, the polls, and whatever. We also relied on Facebook, which as a mayor, I can tell you there's always mixed feelings about Facebook and social media. But in that case, we had social media warriors telling us what was happening in their neighborhoods, which allowed us to make that critical list so that when Eversource rolled up that next morning, we had our list ready by district because we used our snow removal districts in order to go on every road. So there's a lot to be said for being creative and being able to pivot when you're faced with challenges, especially with a 911 and all the police phones going down. But again, the more that we can work together and strengthen that checkoff list, I think that the entire state will be in a better place for the next storm.
Are you finding that crews are idling or whatever that people are reporting online, or are you actually seeing that they're waiting for instruction, or do you think that they're actually having strong communication with Eversource?
So my next career, I'm going to be an electrical engineer for Eversource. I was actually even taught how to switch out a fuse last night. They are not idling. It's a three-phase approach where a crew comes through to evaluate. They then call into the repair crew, here's what you need on such and such a street. The second crew comes through, repairs, and then a third crew comes through and flips the switch. So once you understand, and again, I guess from an Eversource standpoint, from a community relations point, yes, people are seeing trucks driving around and they're not being adequately educated as consumers as to what those trucks could be. So we did not see any idling. They're staging at lake compounds. They do safety huddles, which they would often do in large parking lots. It's a safety huddle. It's required and mandatory before they go out to a crew and do their work. So I was very comfortable with the level of productivity that we saw, the responsiveness of the crews, and really, frankly, the level of expertise that they did while troubleshooting poles, really with a glance, knowing what was happening at that time. So it worked very well here. And I do understand the frustration. I hope that Eversource follows suit, as other states already have, with refunds for customers, spoiled food, personal property damage, insurance deductibles. This was a hard year, and now we have this on top of it. I think that there's many opportunities that Eversource can take to make this right in the eyes of their customers. Okay, so where's everybody's car?